A man in a white coat, his back to her, was hovering over a table. It was the doctor who had delivered her baby. Her heart raced, confusion mixing with unease. What was he doing here so late? And why did his posture seem so tense, almost frantic? Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she stepped closer. That's when she noticed something she couldn't explain, a faint, muffled sound, almost like a cry. Her pulse quickened as a wave of hope and disbelief washed over her. Could it be? No, it wasn't possible, was it? Her voice trembled as she called out, "Doctor, what's going on?" The man froze, his shoulders stiffening as if caught in the act. Slowly, he turned to face her, his expression a mix of surprise and something else she couldn't quite place. Guilt? Panic. Sarah's instincts screamed at her that something wasn't right. She stepped closer, her eyes darting to the table behind him. What she saw made her knees weak, her heart pounding in her chest. The scene before her didn't just raise questions, it shattered everything she thought she knew about that night. And in that moment, Sarah realized her story wasn't over, not by a long shot. This introduction leaves the audience hooked, eager to learn what Sarah discovered and how the events unfolded. Let me know if you'd like any adjustments. Sarah's legs felt as if they might give out, but something stronger than fear kept her standing. She wasn't sure if it was instinct, hope, or sheer determination, but she couldn't turn away now. The doctor hesitated, his body blocking her full view of the table. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but quickly shut it again, his face pale under the fluorescent light. "Doctor," she said again, her voice firmer this time, though it wavered with emotion. "What's going on?" He finally stepped aside, slowly, almost reluctantly, revealing what he had been trying to hide. Sarah's heart leaped into her throat as her eyes landed on a small, fragile form lying on the table. Her baby. At first, it looked as though her worst fears were being confirmed. The baby lay still, wrapped in a thin hospital blanket. But then she heard it again, a faint, almost imperceptible sound. A cry. She rushed forward, disbelief and hope warring within her. "Is my baby alive?" she asked, her voice breaking as she searched the doctor's face for answers. He didn't meet her eyes. I can explain," he stammered, his hands fumbling nervously. "This wasn't supposed to happen." "Wasn't supposed to happen," Sarah repeated, her voice rising. Her fingers trembled as she reached out, gently touching her baby's tiny hand. It was warm. She gasped, tears streaming down her face as the baby stirred, letting out another weak cry. The doctor stepped closer, his voice low and hurried. "Listen to me. There's been a mistake. This wasn't intentional, but if anyone finds out..." "Mistake," Sarah snapped, cutting him off. "You told me my baby was dead." Her voice cracked under the weight of her emotions, but she refused to back down. He raised his hands in a placating gesture. "It's not what you think. The baby's vitals were so faint during delivery, we thought..." He trailed off, his words hanging in the air like a bad excuse. Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. A mistake. Her baby was alive, and they had declared her dead. Questions swirled in her mind, each more troubling than the last. How could this happen? Was it negligence? Or was there something more sinister at play? She cradled her baby, her protective instincts taking over. "You don't get to explain this away," she said, her voice steady now, fueled by a growing anger. "I need the truth. All of it." The doctor looked around nervously, as if expecting someone to walk in at any moment. His voice dropped to a whisper. "You don't understand the pressure we're under. There are things that happen in this hospital that shouldn't. But if you speak out, you could put yourself and your child at risk." Sarah's blood ran cold. What was he talking about? What kind of secrets was this hospital hiding? She wanted to demand answers, but the sound of approaching footsteps cut through the tension like a knife. The doctor's eyes widened in panic. "You need to go," he urged. "Now, before it's too late." But Sarah wasn't about to leave without the truth. Not now, not ever. Sarah clutched her baby tightly, her mind racing with questions and fears she couldn't shake. The doctor's warning echoed in her ears, but she couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that something much bigger was at play. What could be so dangerous that he'd urge her to leave without any real answers? Her instincts told her not to trust him, yet the urgency in his voice felt too real to dismiss. The footsteps grew louder, and Sarah's heart pounded as she looked toward the door. A nurse stepped in, her face calm but her eyes sharp, as if she already knew too much. "Doctor, is everything all right?" she asked, her gaze flickering briefly to Sarah and the baby. The doctor's demeanor shifted instantly. He forced a smile, stepping in front of Sarah like a shield. "Yes, everything's fine. Just a misunderstanding. You can go back to your station." The nurse hesitated for a moment, her eyes narrowing slightly. "If you need assistance, let me know." She turned and walked out, but the tension she left behind lingered, thick and suffocating. As soon as the door closed, Sarah turned to the doctor. "I'm not leaving," she said firmly. "Not until you tell me what's really going on." The doctor sighed, running a hand through his hair. He seemed to weigh his options, glancing nervously at the door as if he expected the nurse to return. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't the first time something like this has happened." Sarah froze. "What do you mean? How many times?" "I don't know for sure," he admitted, his eyes darting around the room. "But it's not uncommon. There are pressures in this hospital, financial, legal, ethical. Mistakes get buried, records get altered. It's easier to declare a stillbirth than to deal with complications, lawsuits." His words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. "You're saying this is a cover-up? That you were just going to let my baby—" Her voice cracked, and she stopped herself, unwilling to finish the sentence. "It's more complicated than that," he said quickly, as if trying to justify the unjustifiable. "There are people who benefit from this kind of secrecy, people with power. If you speak out, they won't just come after me, they'll come after you too." Sarah felt a wave of nausea. How could this be happening? Her mind reeled as she thought about the other mothers, the other families who might have been fed the same lies. How many babies had been declared dead when they weren't? And why? Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft whimper from her baby. The sound grounded her, reminding her of what mattered most. "I don't care who's involved," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "My child deserves the truth, and so do I." The doctor looked at her, his face a mixture of regret and fear. "You don't understand who you're up against," he said. "But if you really want to know the truth, you'll need more than just me. There's someone who can help you, but finding them won't be easy." Before Sarah could respond, the door opened again, this time more forcefully. Two men in suits entered, their expressions cold and unreadable. "Doctor," one of them said, his voice clipped. "We need to speak with you. Alone." Sarah's grip on her baby tightened as the men's eyes flicked to her. The air in the room felt charged, and she knew that whatever was happening was far from over. The two men in suits stepped closer, their presence imposing. Sarah felt a chill creep over her, the weight of the situation sinking in. One of the men, tall and with a stern face, locked eyes with her. There was no sympathy in his gaze, only cold calculation. The other man, shorter and more cautious in his movements, seemed to linger by the door, almost as if keeping an eye on the exit. The doctor, visibly shaken, cleared his throat. "This is a misunderstanding," he began, his voice tight. But the men didn't respond. Instead, they ignored him completely and focused on Sarah. "Miss, we need to ask you to leave," the taller man said, his voice smooth but firm. "Now." Sarah felt a surge of defiance rise within her. "I'm not leaving until I get answers," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and determination. The man's gaze hardened. "We're not asking," he said coldly. "We're telling you." Her mind raced. She could feel the danger closing in around her, like a tightening noose. She looked at the doctor, who now seemed to be shrinking, his earlier confidence entirely gone. It was clear he wasn't in control here. The man at the door glanced at his colleague. Without a word, the second man stepped forward, blocking her path to the door. The first man continued, his voice lowering to a threatening whisper. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. What you've seen, it doesn't just disappear. If you talk, there will be consequences. For you, for your child." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she realized the full weight of what they were saying. This wasn't just about a mistake in the morgue. This was something much bigger, a system designed to protect its own at any cost. Her baby was caught in the middle of it, and so was she. The doctor swallowed hard. "Sarah," he said, his voice almost pleading, "you don't understand. This isn't the way to go. You don't know who they are or what they can do." The doctor hesitated, his eyes flicking nervously between the two men. He opened his mouth to speak, but was interrupted by the taller man's sharp voice. "Enough." The man's hand shot out, grabbing Sarah's arm with an iron grip. "We're done here." A flash of panic coursed through her. They were going to take her away, weren't they? She had to act fast. She turned to the doctor, her eyes begging him for help, but he looked away, too scared to do anything. In that moment, the second man moved toward her, his hand reaching out to grab her wrist. But just as he touched her, a sudden noise rang through the room, a loud crash from somewhere outside the morgue. The men froze, their eyes darting toward the door. For a split second, Sarah saw an opening. Without thinking, she pulled her arm free, rushing toward the door. She made it 2 steps before the man at the door lunged at her, grabbing her by the shoulder. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," he growled. Sarah's heart raced, but her determination flared. She kicked out, catching him off guard, and pushed the door open just enough to slip through. The hallway outside was dimly lit, and she sprinted down it, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. She didn't know where she was going, but she couldn't stop now. She heard footsteps behind her, getting closer. The chase had begun. Sarah's feet pounded against the hospital floor, her breath coming in quick, shallow bursts as she turned corners without thinking, her mind focused entirely on escaping the men behind her. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed, getting closer with each passing second. She didn't know where she was headed, only that she couldn't stop. Every instinct told her she had to get out of there, get to safety, but she didn't even know where safety was anymore. Just as she rounded another corner, she collided with something or someone. For a moment, she was so disoriented that she almost fell, but the strong grip of a hand steadied her. She looked up to find a familiar face, but one she hadn't expected to see. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" It was Mia, one of the nurses who had worked in the maternity ward. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Mia had always been kind to her during her pregnancy, always offering comforting words and gentle care. But seeing her now, the look in Mia's eyes was anything but comforting. "Mia," Sarah gasped, still catching her breath. They're after me. The doctor, the men in suits." Mia's face flickered with something Sarah couldn't quite place. Was it guilt? Fear? Before Sarah could say more, Mia quickly glanced over her shoulder down the hallway, her expression tense. "We need to go now," Mia said, her voice sharp. She grabbed Sarah's arm and began pulling her in the opposite direction, away from the men who were getting closer with every passing second. Confusion raced through Sarah's mind. "Why are you helping me?" Mia's grip tightened as she urged Sarah to move faster. "There's no time to explain. Just trust me." Sarah's pulse quickened, but she didn't have much of a choice. The footsteps behind them were too loud, too close. They had to move. They reached a stairwell, and Mia quickly pulled open the door, urging Sarah to follow her up the stairs. Sarah hesitated, the weight of her baby in her arms, making each step harder to take. But Mia didn't wait for her to catch up. She was already halfway up, her footsteps echoing in the empty stairwell. "What's going on?" Sarah finally managed to ask, her voice low and frantic as they ascended. Why are they after me? Why are you helping me? Mia looked back, her face pale but resolute, because they're not the only ones watching you. Sarah froze, her heart skipping a beat. What do you mean? Mia's face hardened. You need to know the truth, but not here. Not now. She reached the top of the stairs and swung open another door, revealing a small, dimly lit room. It was empty, except for a desk and a few chairs. Mia quickly ushered Sarah inside and shut the door behind them, locking it with a soft click. She didn't give Sarah a chance to speak, immediately pulling a small envelope from her bag. She held it out to Sarah, her hands trembling slightly. This is for you. It's everything you need to know. Sarah took the envelope, still too shocked to ask any more questions. She could feel her hands shaking as she tore it open, pulling out a single sheet of paper. Her eyes scanned the contents, and what she read made her blood run cold. It was a list of names of people, families, hospitals, doctors, who had all been involved in something far larger than she could have imagined. It wasn't just about her or her baby. It was a network, a system that had been operating under the radar, covering up deaths, faking stillbirths, manipulating records, all to conceal a terrifying truth. There was something far more sinister happening behind the scenes. Before Sarah could process it all, Mia stepped back, her eyes darting nervously to the door. I don't have much time. You need to leave before they realize you're here. And whatever you do, don't trust anyone. Not even me. Sarah's head spun, the weight of the information in her hands nearly too much to bear. She glanced at Mia, but the nurse's expression was unreadable now, a mask of determination and fear. Mia, what is this? Sarah whispered, her voice hoarse. I wish I could explain, Mia said softly. But I can't. You're on your own now. Just don't let them find you. As Mia opened the door and glanced out into the hallway, Sarah's mind raced. She wasn't sure who to trust anymore or how deep the conspiracy went, but one thing was clear. The stakes had just become much higher, and her fight for the truth was only just beginning. As she stepped back into the shadows, she heard the sound of footsteps approaching once again, this time much closer. The tension continues to rise, and now the stakes are higher than ever. Let me know if you want me to keep building this story. Sarah pressed herself against the cold wall of the small room, clutching the envelope tightly in her hands. Her pulse was pounding in her ears, and her heart felt like it was about to burst from the tension. The footsteps outside grew louder, closer. There was no time to waste. She had to make a decision now. As she gathered her thoughts, a feeling of cold dread settled in her stomach. Mia had told her not to trust anyone, and yet she was the only one who had helped her so far. But was that just another piece of the puzzle, a way to lead her deeper into something darker? The names on the sheet of paper were a map, a trail leading to a web of corruption she wasn't sure she was ready to uncover. But with her baby in her arms, she couldn't turn back now. She shoved the envelope into her jacket pocket, her fingers shaking as she slowly opened the door. The hallway was empty, the silence deafening after the chaos of moments before, but she knew that wouldn't last long. She had to get out of the hospital, and fast. Just as she stepped into the hallway, a figure appeared at the far end. It was Mia. Sarah, wait, Mia called out softly, her voice urgent but steady. Sarah froze, 1,000 thoughts racing through her mind. Was this a trap? Was Mia trying to warn her, or was she part of the very thing Sarah was running from? Mia, what's going on? What's happening? Sarah's voice was trembling now, the weight of everything crashing down on her. Mia approached cautiously, glancing behind her before speaking. You need to listen to me. I've been helping you, yes, but I didn't have a choice. The truth is, I'm not just a nurse here. I've been working undercover for months. There is a group, a network, of people in this hospital, in hospitals across the city. They're part of something much bigger than anyone realizes. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. What are you saying? Mia stepped closer, lowering her voice. The babies, the stillbirths, the miscarriages, They're being trafficked. It's not about money, it's about control. They've been selling babies to the highest bidder, adoption agencies, black market buyers, even to people who want to create false identities. Your baby was supposed to be one of them. The revelation hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. She had never imagined something like this could be happening, let alone in a place she trusted. "Why didn't you tell me this earlier?" Sarah demanded, her voice shaking with a mix of disbelief and fury. I couldn't trust anyone. But when I saw your baby, I knew I had to help. Mia replied, her voice full of regret. Just as Sarah opened her mouth to respond, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Mia, I thought we agreed you wouldn't interfere." The two of them turned to see the tall man from the suits standing at the far end of the hallway. His cold, calculating expression hadn't changed. You're part of it," Sarah whispered, a wave of shock washing over her. The man smiled darkly, stepping closer. "You have no idea how deep this goes, do you? Mia's right about one thing. This isn't just about money. But it's too late for you now. You've seen too much. And now we have to take care of it." Before Sarah could react, Mia took a step forward, standing between Sarah and the man. "No," she said firmly. "It's over. I've seen enough." The man's eyes narrowed. "You're making a mistake." Mia didn't flinch. "No, you are." In one swift motion, Mia pulled a small device from her pocket and pressed it against the wall. A loud beep echoed, followed by a sudden explosion of light. Sarah blinked, stunned, as the hallway filled with flashing lights and a loud siren blared through the speakers. The man recoiled, his eyes darting around in confusion. "What is this?" Mia turned to Sarah. "Go, now." Without hesitation, Sarah ran, holding her baby tightly as she bolted down the hallway, her mind spinning. Behind her, she heard the man shouting, cursing, but Mia's actions had bought her the precious seconds she needed to escape. As Sarah rounded a corner, she stopped short, nearly colliding with another figure. It was the doctor, the one who had been in the morgue. His eyes were wide with panic as he looked over his shoulder, then quickly ushered Sarah into a nearby storage room. "They're coming. You need to get out of here," he whispered urgently. "But why are you helping me?" Sarah gasped, still trying to process everything. The doctor's face hardened. "Because I can't keep covering for them. I didn't have a choice until now." Suddenly, the door to the storage room burst open, and the tall man stepped in, his eyes locked on Sarah. But before he could reach her, the doctor stepped forward, a gun now in his hand. "Stay back," he said, his voice low but commanding. The man didn't flinch. "You don't want to do this." But the doctor didn't hesitate. He fired once, and the man crumpled to the ground. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah stood there, her mind spinning with shock and disbelief. The doctor dropped the gun, his expression unreadable. "Go," he said softly. "It's your only chance." As Sarah stumbled out of the hospital, she felt like the weight of the world had just been lifted, yet at the same time, the uncertainty of the truth was heavier than ever. Who could she trust? Who had been working behind the scenes, pulling the strings all along? And most importantly, what had her baby been saved from? She didn't have all the answers yet, but she knew one thing: the fight was far from over. Sarah stumbled into the night air, her breath ragged, her mind spinning as she cradled her baby tightly in her arms. The hospital loomed behind her, its sterile walls now a distant memory of everything she had just endured. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was still in danger, that something was waiting to pull her back into the darkness. But for now, she was free. The chaos inside those walls had finally been left behind. As she walked down the empty street, trying to process everything that had happened, a new sense of resolve began to take hold. Mia had helped her escape, and the doctor had taken a stand against the very people who had controlled the fate of so many innocent lives. The names on the list Mia had given her, the truth that had been buried for so long, it was all a part of something bigger. Something corrupt, something twisted, but it didn't have to end there. Sarah knew she couldn't let it end there. She couldn't just walk away. There were still so many families, so many babies who had been hidden in the shadows of a system built to exploit them. She wasn't going to be silent, not anymore. She was going to take the truth out into the world and let everyone know what had been happening in those hospitals. But as she walked, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She stopped, hesitated, then pulled it out, her heart skipping a beat as she read the message. It was from Mia. "They're coming for you. They know you're alive. You're not safe. But there's one more thing you need to see. Meet me at the old warehouse at 4 a.m. Don't trust anyone else." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. The danger wasn't over, not by a long shot. But she had come too far to back down now. She couldn't let the truth slip away again. She needed answers. She glanced around, her senses alert, every shadow seeming to hide a threat. But nothing could stop her now. She had a purpose, a reason to keep fighting. Her baby, her future, everyone's future, depended on it. By the time she reached the warehouse, the world around her felt quieter, almost too still. Her nerves were frayed, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The building loomed ahead, its broken windows and rusty doors a reminder of the darkness she had been running from. She pushed open the creaky door, her footsteps echoing as she made her way inside. "Sarah," a voice called softly from the shadows. It was Mia. She stepped forward, her face strained with worry. "You shouldn't have come," she said, her voice filled with regret. "Why? What's going on?" Sarah asked, her voice low, desperate for answers. Mia looked around nervously, her eyes darting toward the dark corners of the room. "I never meant for you to get involved in this. But now that you know, there's no turning back. They won't stop until they silence you. And they'll do whatever it takes." Before Sarah could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed behind her. She whipped around, her heart racing. A figure emerged from the shadows. It was the doctor. But something was different. His face was pale, his eyes dark with guilt. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice trembling. "I never wanted this to happen, but it's too late to stop it now." And then, with one last sudden motion, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a gun. Everything froze. The world around Sarah seemed to spin in slow motion as she realized what was happening. But before she could react, a shot rang out, sharp, deafening. The doctor collapsed, his body hitting the floor with a thud. Mia stepped forward, her expression hard. It was always him. He was the one behind it all. Sarah's mind raced. The doctor, the man who had been so kind, so terrified in the morgue, had been a part of the conspiracy all along. He had been playing both sides. He had been the architect of the very system that had nearly taken her baby's life. Mia pulled Sarah toward the door, urgency in her steps. "It's not over, but this is your chance. You need to tell the world what's happening. Expose them before they can cover it up again." Sarah looked down at her baby, her hands trembling, but there was a fire in her eyes now. She wasn't just a victim, she was a fighter, and she would stop at nothing to make sure the truth came to light. As they stepped back into the night, the weight of everything they had uncovered pressed heavily on her shoulders. But in that moment, Sarah knew one thing for sure: the battle was far from over. The fight for justice, for truth, would continue. And no matter how hard they tried to silence her, she would make sure their story was heard. For herself, for her baby, and for every voice that had been lost in the shadows.